In 1967, I had my first job as a photographer on a feature film in Denmark, and I went there for 7 months or so. And I had my pictures published in major magazines in Denmark and Sweden, and I knew the film people there, but the Vietnam War was going on, and I wanted to try and do something to help stop the war. So I went back to the States to see what I could do and to think about it. And my first thought was, I'll go to Vietnam and take pictures and show how terrible war is. And my second thought was, I absolutely don't want to be in war. And so I thought that I could take pictures of all the peace demonstrations that are going on. I approached a local newspaper called the West Side News. They would write articles about the demonstrations. So they're definitely interested in having me take pictures, and they had a police press pass. So I was able to go to these demonstrations and go inside the police lines and not be pushed back by the police and so on. But then there was an ad in the newspaper saying Woody Guthrie Memorial Concert, and named a bunch of people, including Bob Dylan. So immediately the tickets were sold out. And I, as a newspaper photojournalist, contacted Carnegie Hall, and they said, you got to call Bob Dylan's manager, who's Albert Grossman. He's controlling all this. So I called Albert's office and I told him I was a photographer working with the West Side News, and they mailed me 2 tickets. So I invited a girlfriend to come with me. And I had a bag of cameras on one arm and a bag of film on the other arm. And I have one camera around my neck, and we're going into Carnegie Hall because you can't come in with a camera. And I said, oh, I'm a press photographer. And I show the press pass and the letter from Albert's office saying I can photograph. And the guy says, I don't care, you still can't come in. You got to go check your cameras. So we walked back outside, and I took the camera off my neck, and I took the lens off the body, and I gave both to my girlfriend to put in her bag. And I says, don't give those to anybody. And then I checked the rest of my stuff. And so then we go into the concert. When they come on, I bend down low over the back of the seat and keep my camera low and all that, trying to not be seen, of course. And at some point, I see a guard on the left side of the auditorium waving at me, like telling me to stop, obviously, and I ignored him. I see him start to come around, so then I acknowledged him. I said, okay, I'll stop. So I put the camera down and I took the film out and I gave it to my girlfriend and I said, don't give this film up. And I put in a new blank roll, and the guard keeps going like this, you got to come out. So I waited until at least the music had stopped for a moment. Then we got out and we walked across the front of the audience and out to the side door. And there's a retinue of people there, maybe 5 or 6 or 10, and they formed a little circle around me. Albert Grossman was there, and he's saying to me, what are you doing taking pictures? You're not allowed to take pictures. And I said, but I wrote to your office, and I showed him the paper, and I said I wanted to take pictures, and you sent me tickets and blah, blah, blah. And he's saying, it doesn't matter, you still can't do that. He says, give me the film. So I knew it was going to happen, right? We went back and forth a little bit. At some point, I held the camera up to him, and I said, you're not going to get this film, right? And of course, I was baiting him, really. And I knew he was going to grab the camera from me, which he did. And he opened the back of the camera and pulled the film out, making the film even blanker. And then he said, now get out of here, right? So we didn't start off too well, in other words. At that point, Janis and Big Brother signed with Albert Grossman. I was going around just photographing what they were doing a little bit. And we went up to his office, and at some point, Don Simon, who was producing their Big Brother's record, comes over, sits down next to me and says, you have to leave now because we're going to talk about money. And you can't be in a conversation on that. So that was fine. I packed my cameras and left. Years later, John told me, Albert had just said, get that guy out of here. I can't stand him. Shortly after that, I'm photographing Big Brother again at Club Generation, and there's a rock and roll band. You couldn't hear a thing. It was so loud and everything. And I was on the back of the crowd taking pictures of them. And someone taps me on the back. I turn around, it's Albert, right? And he's going like this to me, like, come here. And takes me into a utility closet and closes the door, and it's quiet in there. We could talk. And he said to me, are you free next weekend? You know, I said, I don't know what I said, but there's obviously some form of yes. And he said, we have a new band that we need pictures of. And I said, what's the name of the band? He says, they don't have a name yet. We're not sure. And maybe they won't have a name because they don't want to be locked into doing the same kind of music. Then I flew up to Toronto with John Simon, and that's where we did the Next of Kin photograph. And after Toronto, I went up to Big Pink. This is remarkably peaceful. This the second time I've been here in, let's say, 2 months or so. The guys just referred to it in a funny way, the big pink, as like an absurd color for a house in the woods, that kind of thing. So it was kind of appreciating the dissonance between what it was and where it was. I had taken the photographs for Big Pink and the band, and I met Bob at a party just briefly, but we didn't speak at all. At some point, Al Aronowitz, who was a writer and a friend of Bob's, called me up and he said, "We need a picture of Bob for the cover of the Saturday Post. Do you want to do it?" So that's a question you don't say no to. And he said, "All right, well, come on up to Woodstock." It was a musician's paradise because it was an arts colony, and people had been attracted here over the years for the creative vibration that it had. I was living in Manhattan at that point. I rented a Volkswagen Bucks and I drove up to Woodstock, and I met Al in the middle of town. And he said, "Follow me up," and he drives me up through the mountains. The first time I'd really been in the hills of Woodstock. And he stops his car in the middle of the driveway, and I'm right behind him, and he says, "Stay here, I'll be right back." And he walks into the house that was there. 5 minutes later, it comes back, and Bob is with him. And he comes over to the car, and he says, "Elliott, this is Bob. Bob, this is Elliott." And he jumps in his car like he's running away from something and drives off, leaving me with Bob Dylan. So Bob had brought his guitar out, and he just walks over to the wood pile that you can see in the pictures and sits down and just starts playing guitar and singing. And I start taking pictures, and almost no words were exchanged. At some point, I realized that here I am 10 feet away from the most famous person in the world practically, and it doesn't feel special. Because all I'm doing is wanting to get that picture right. The first time we just took pictures outside, and then I went back to the city. I came back with the photographs to show him. We picked out the picture for the Saturday Post cover that he wanted. And when we got finished looking at pictures, I said, "I'm going back to the city now." He says, "Oh, we have a room upstairs if you want to stay overnight." So I did. And then the next day, he asked me to take pictures of him with his family. To me, it was like seeing the beauty of love, the beauty of family. I decided I wanted to live in Woodstock. So I thought, well, I'll rent a house and keep my little place in New York City, and I'll go back and forth. I got a call from Bob saying, "I just got back from Nashville doing my next album, and we need a picture for the back of the album." And he said, "Come on over, I'll play it for you." So I went over and he played Nashville Skyline for me. And he showed me what he wanted to be the front of the album, which was a picture of the skyline of Nashville. So we were just hanging out in his house. So we started to walk out, and I walked out first. And as he was leaving the house, he stopped at a coat rack and picked up a hat. Took it with him. So we just started to take pictures outside the house. And we were walking a little bit through the woods, and at some point he said to me, "Why don't you take a picture from down there?" And he's pointing to the ground. And I got down on one knee and I'm picking up the camera, getting it set up, and he's standing there and he says, "You think I should wear this hat?" And he lifts the hat up and starts to put it on his head. And I say, "I don't know," as I take the picture of him asking me if he should wear the hat. And that's where the smile comes from. It was this freedom of hanging out together.